Tonight, the special relationship looking increasingly strained. In his latest phone call with Sky News, President Trump describes UK policies as insane and threatens the trade deal, upping the ante over Iran.
A lot of pressure has been applied to me to take a different course, and that pressure included what happened last night. I'm not going to change my mind.
The Liberal Democrat leader Ed Davey compared Donald Trump to a mafia boss, but in the conflict itself, new indications for hope. We understand a second round of US-Iran talks is likely next week as Pakistan's army chief arrives in Tehran to help lay the groundwork. And a week to the day after Israel launched a devastating bombardment, pressure mounts for a ceasefire in Lebanon. The UN refugee chief tells me it can't come soon enough.
This is truly a deepening humanitarian tragedy in every sense of the word.
The detention of journalist Ahmad Shahab El-Din in Kuwait raises new questions about a wartime crackdown on freedom of speech in the Gulf. Plus,
it is the greatest humanitarian crisis of the 21st century.
Sudan enters a fourth year of war marked by famine, massacres and sexual violence in what the United Nations calls an abandoned crisis. That's all ahead in the world with me, Yalda Hakim. Hello and welcome to the programme live here from Beirut. I'm Yalda Hakim. It never used to be that a journalist could just pick up the phone and talk to the leader of the free world. Well, our Mark Stone has done that twice now with Donald Trump. And what he's heard on the other end is a US president increasingly bitter about a lack of UK support for his war in Iran. On the special relationship, he told Mark it's been better, but it's sad, and we gave them a good trade deal, better than I had to, which can always be changed. Discussing overall relations, he said he wants them to succeed, then warned if you have bad immigration policies and bad energy policies, you have the worst of both. And he said the PM's made a tragic mistake in closing the North Sea oil. You see, your energy prices are the highest in the world. And I think he's made a tragic mistake on immigration. Here's one of the questions Keir Starmer faced from MPs in the Commons. Have a look.
Mr. Speaker, in a phone call with Sky News last night, President Trump has threatened to rip up his trade deal with the UK as punishment for us not joining his idiotic war in Iran. Mr. Speaker, this must be the last straw. Surely the Prime Minister can't send our King to meet a man who treats our country like a mafia boss running a protection racket.
My position on the Iran war has been clear from the start. We're not going to get dragged into this war. It is not our war. And a lot of pressure has been applied to me to take a different course. And that pressure included what happened last night. I'm not going to change my mind. I'm not going to yield. It is not in our national interest to join this war, and we will not do so. I know where I stand.
The Prime Minister there. Well, as for the war itself, though, there are indications the US and Iran will go into a second round of talks in Pakistan next week.
There were so many challenges. Eventually, when things come out and more information can be shared, you will get to know, and the world would get to know, the challenges that Pakistan's leadership faced in bridging that gap until the end of the talks, and they continued with that. But the talks happened, 21 hours, very successful. There's talk of the next round. It is happening because we are trusted.
It's Pakistan's High Commissioner there. Well, more on that shortly. Let's go to Washington, though, and speak to our Mark Stone. And Mark, good to see you. You've had quite a week speaking to the US president twice in 1 week. I mean, it is quite extraordinary that, you can just ring his mobile phone and he'll answer and take your questions.
It's bizarre, to be honest, but it's happening, and it's he was pretty candid, very candid, and scathing. What was striking to me it was a 5-minute call, and we kind of started to talk about the royals because it came just an hour after Buckingham Palace had announced details of the state visit, King Charles and Queen Camilla, the week after next. So that was a kind of a soft moment to start with, because one of the things, Yalda, with these calls is you don't know what sort of mood he's going to be in. I mean, he's answered, which is positive, but you then don't know quite how he's going to react. And so you don't want to go in with a sort of gotcha question or something harder, because he might just think, well, I've got better things to do, and put the phone down. So we started by talking about the royals, and it was really clear to me just how excited he is about this trip, how fond he is of the royal family. He went into some detail about what a wonderful person King Charles is. Which bit of are you most excited about? I asked him. All of it, he said. Just being with him. I've known him for a long time. He's wonderful. He's a wonderful person. Interestingly, he didn't appear to be aware or entirely clear of the protocol and how these state visits come about. He didn't know, when he spoke to me, he didn't appear clear that the king is only coming because he is coming at the request of the Prime Minister, the request of the British government, and as it turns out, probably to do a little bit of mending on the special relationship, because that's the other thing we got onto. You've read through the quotes there, but scathing stuff. The way he pivoted from how disappointed he appeared to be with Britain and the direction it was going to how effusive he was about the royal family was very interesting.
Yeah, and Mark, I mean, on the other side of this, we heard the Prime Minister there talk about the pressure he's facing for Britain to take a different course, and he says he's not going to change his mind. He's resisting that pressure. This afternoon, we also got some news alerts that perhaps this 2-week ceasefire between the United States and Iran would be extended. And then Caroline Levitt, the White House spokesperson, came out and said that's not the case.
Yes, she spoke for quite some time this afternoon at a briefing, and she said that there is no request for a ceasefire at the moment, but she kind of suggested that there could be over the course of the maybe hours or days ahead, but no request to delay or to lengthen the space of time that the ceasefire lasts for. She did say that the talks were productive and ongoing. She said that she feels good, or that the president feels good about the prospect of a deal, and they're likely to be in Islamabad again. The president a couple of days ago suggested in a call to the New York Post that the talks maybe could be in Europe, and then he corrected himself, and she confirmed they would be in Islamabad when they happen. So some movement there. The sense I got, I was at the White House for a few hours today, that there's a sense of momentum. Now, whether this is self-generated by the president, as he likes to do sometimes, overstate just how far things are to kind of, jumpstart the process, or whether genuinely things are moving in the right direction. It's quite hard to tell. But have a listen to Caroline Levitt speaking earlier.
I saw some reporting, again, bad reporting this morning, that we had formally requested an extension of the ceasefire. That is not true at this moment. We've remained very much engaged in these negotiations, in these talks. You heard from the Vice President directly and the President this week that these conversations are productive and ongoing, and that's where we are right now.
Back to the phone call briefly, Yalda. I did talk to, at the end of the phone call, the president said, I've got to go now, and I got a quick word on Iran. I asked him whether he thought that by the time the king gets here, he will have a ceasefire, and he seemed relatively confident that he would. So that's interesting. And if you're wondering why we're not listening to the president, we weren't allowed to record it. That was one of the conditions. Well, we could record it, but weren't allowed to broadcast it. That's what he said at the beginning of the call. I told him I was recording it, and he said, wait, you can record it, but you can't broadcast it. Do I have your word on that? I said yes, and then we were off. And if you want to listen to more about all that, Martha and I have been talking about it on the Trump 100 podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, it's quite something bizarre, but quite extraordinary as well to be able to speak directly to the US president like that over the phone. Mark, thank you so much. Well, there were also suggestions that a ceasefire in Lebanon would be considered by Israel's Security Cabinet during a meeting tonight. No indications of that so far, despite what the UN refugee chief Barham Saleh told me today is a catastrophic situation beyond comprehension in Lebanon. More than 1 million people are displaced and 2,000 have been killed in Israel's air and ground offensives against Hezbollah. When I spoke to Barham Saleh, I began by asking about reports denied by the US about its truce with Iran being extended. Have a listen.
Hopefully that is so. Hopefully the situation is beyond us and we would have a peaceful situation. We need a peace settlement in this region, a peace that will not allow for the repeat of these episodes of violence every now and again. People of this region have had enough. Hopefully there will be a lasting peace and the people across the Middle East will go back to what matters most, delivering for their own people.
We're sitting here in Beirut, in Lebanon at the moment. This country has been caught up in the middle of this war for the last 6 weeks, and the humanitarian crisis here is a catastrophe. Over 1 million people displaced, and we know, according to the Health Ministry, over 2,000 people killed. You've been here, you've met some of the displaced. Just give me a sense of how much of an issue this is now for the humanitarian crisis that this country is facing.
This is truly a deepening humanitarian tragedy in every sense of the word. 1 million people, over 1 million people displaced as a result of this war over the last few weeks. This is 1/5 of the population of Lebanon. Imagine the impact of this, not to mention the utter devastation that many of the homes, many of the infrastructure in the country has suffered. This is truly very, very difficult and beyond comprehension in so many ways. I've visited some of the sites, I've visited some of the shelters that have these displaced families in. They need support, we need to be there for them. But at the end of the day, humanitarian assistance can do that much. There needs to be an end to the cycle of violence. There needs to be a peaceful settlement that will allow for stability to be restored, for people to go back home. Because this is a humanitarian catastrophe in every sense of the word, but it is also of huge social and political consequences to the overall Lebanese situation. This country is known for its resilience, but resilience has its limits. Lebanon has historically been a haven for tolerance and coexistence, and also, by the way, a host of refugees from neighboring countries and beyond, to be fair. Now for Lebanon to be subjected to this is really, really tragic and sad.
Are you saying that you're seeing a sort of a pressure cooker situation here with these communities who are living side by side, that this war has put domestic pressure on this country as well?
Look, on one hand, one has to appreciate and recognize the resilience of the people in this country and how people have come out to support the affected populations, the displaced people. The government has been doing a fantastic work with limited resources. We've been there to help in as much as we could. And the communities, to be fair, have been there hosting families who have been forced out of their homes. But you cannot take this for granted. It is a major political and social and economic pressure on a country that is so precarious a situation as well, that needed a space of peace, that needs a space of stability so that it can recover from these dynamics of conflict that has afflicted and impacted this country forever.
You went to the shelters, you spoke to those communities who have lost their homes. Certainly down south, tens of thousands of homes have been destroyed. When you say they need to go back home, where can they go when all of the homes have been leveled?
At the end of the day now, the stories that we're hearing from the south, a lot of destruction to the homes and the communities. So exactly, how can we do this thing? Are we going to also engage in yet another reconstruction campaign of these communities, only to be caught back into another situation of violence months from now or a year or 2 years from now? This cannot happen. There needs to be a permanent peace, there needs to be a lasting peace. And we need to be with the Lebanese state and the Lebanese government as it tries to really manage the situation and get out of this cycle. And all actors in the region, the Israelis, the Lebanese, and others, really need to be hopefully coming to terms with this reality and end this situation.
Israel says for its security, it needs to create a buffer zone where residents cannot return, because they too are saying they don't want this ongoing cycle of violence and impact that it has on their northern communities as well. So where are these people supposed to go who have lived in these communities for generations?
First and foremost, the priority must be an end of this war, and hopefully to launch a dialogue, a process by which we would end up into a permanent peace where these dynamics would not happen again. And no doubt many of these people who are from these areas will need to go back to their homes, and I very much hope that this is a fundamental human right for people to go back to their territory and live there, and live in peace and security for all, and that's what is intended to. Yesterday there were these talks in Washington. This is an important development. Let's hope that this will lead to a process that will end with a lasting peace and security for all in the region.
You've been meeting with Lebanese leaders, their leadership, ministers who have been discussing the humanitarian crisis with you, the political crisis in this country. What do they now need from the international community?
Of course, they need support, immediate support in terms of humanitarian support to the people who desperately need it. And really, the humanitarian needs are desperate, are real. But also they need support for the government and for the Lebanese state to make sure that it can really help steer the country towards a peaceful arrangement where these attacks and these wars cannot happen again.
And just finally, High Commissioner, we've seen in the last week that Lebanon was not part of any kind of ceasefire deal, despite what we heard from various leaders. If there is no peace in this country, if the ceasefire doesn't apply to Lebanon, what is your greatest concern for this country?
The greatest concern is the humanitarian suffering of the people of Lebanon. And this is really a country that has suffered so much over the years. And this is an important country, a country of consequence. We cannot look the other way. And imagine if the situation continues, the impact, the implications, the consequences, not just for Lebanon, but also beyond, is going to be consequential. I don't think people have the option of looking away. Lebanon needs support. Lebanon needs peace. We should be there to helping the people of Lebanon, the government of Lebanon, to make it.
It's the UN Refugee Chief, Barham Saleh, speaking to me earlier today. Well, this is The World with me, Yalda Hakim, in Beirut. Still to come on the programme, economic divisions on show as the Chancellor heads to Washington and steps up criticisms of the war. I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching. Good to see you again. How are you? Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back. Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be allowed to warn.
I'm just going to put some body armor on. I'm Yalda Hakim.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... Hi, darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
...is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
People are directly protesting.
The whole neighborhood is rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
Now to the economic impacts of the Iran war and the view from opposite sides of the Atlantic. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is becoming increasingly upfront with her criticism of the war, calling it a mistake. She's in Washington for spring meetings of the International Monetary Fund. Have a listen.
There was a diplomatic channel open. Conversations, there's discussions, formal discussions were happening. I think it was a mistake to end those and to enter into conflict, because I'm not convinced that we are safer today than we were a few weeks ago.
Rachel Reeves there. Well, let's go straight to our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, who is in Washington. And Ed, I mean, listening there to Rachel Reeves, and I've been listening in the last couple of days to the US Treasury Secretary as well, it's almost like they're assessing two different situations.
It is a bit, Yalda, and it's the interesting thing about that intervention from Rachel Reeves is that these are certainly thoughts that many people around Washington, particularly finance ministers coming here for the International Monetary Fund spring meeting, which is kind of what they do. This is the moment that finance ministers, central bankers, they come to Washington, they talk about the state of the economy, and they give their assessment of it. And clearly there is one big economic story right now. It is the economic fallout from what's happening in the Gulf. There is enormous fallout, and not just, it's worth saying, in Europe and the UK, when you look at the impact in terms of the downgrades that we've seen on growth, they are mostly skewed towards poorer countries. It's poorer countries that are struggling to generate the extra income they need. They're struggling to pay for the diesel and the kerosene they need, whereas richer countries, like many of those in Europe, can actually afford. It's very hard, particularly for some households. And so a lot of people are asking that question, why is America doing this? And that, in essence, is what Rachel Reeves is starting to challenge. And she's doing it, as I say, in a more forthright way than we've heard from the UK government so far, which marks a diplomatic moment. She has met today over the course of the day in various kind of bilateral meetings with certain of her counterparts, including Scott Bessent, who is the US Treasury Secretary. And he was talking actually earlier on today about the state of the US economy, and just for a kind of have a listen to him instead.
This quarter will be slower than it was. I think that first quarter was moving along well. And we've heard the president say that one of the reasons he believed that he was able to prosecute this war now, and other than he believed it was the right time to prevent Iran from having a long-term nuclear weapon and to decapitate the regime, was that the economy was in such good shape. This conflict is going to end, that I don't know whether it's 3 days or 3 weeks.
This is clearly one of those big moments. Finance ministers looking at the state of their economies, working out whether they are facing recession as a result of this war happening right now. And like everyone else, trying to kind of prize trying to kind of, I guess, look through the fog of war and work out how long this is going to last. It's just something, a guessing game everyone has been doing. The guessing will continue, and we're going to hear more from the Chancellor and from other finance ministers over the course of the next 24, 48 hours, and we'll bring you more of their comments soon.
Ed, as always, thank you so much. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the programme, what the detention of a journalist in Kuwait is revealing about a wartime crackdown across the Gulf.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
Perfect. Let's bring you some breaking news.
Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking,
thank you so much,
trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access.
Let me give you a sneak peek.
It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
Activists are calling for the release of a journalist that they say has been detained in Kuwait after he posted videos about the Iran war. The Committee to Protect Journalists says Ahmad Shahab Eldin, an American Kuwaiti, is facing charges including spreading false information, harming national security. He'd shared pictures of the so-called friendly fire incident involved in a US fighter jet crash in Kuwait earlier last month. Kuwait and other Gulf states have cracked down on people posting footage of strikes since the war broke out. Well, in a statement, the Committee to Protect Journalists said, "We are seeing escalating censorship of journalists and news outlets across the world in relation to the Iran war, including in the Gulf. National security is being used as a pretext to crack down on freedom of speech, and Shihab al-Din's detention is emblematic of that. He must be freed immediately." Well, Shireen Tadros is a friend of Ahmed Shihab al-Din. She's the Deputy Director of Advocacy and UN Representative for Amnesty International and was previously a Middle East correspondent for Sky News. Shireen, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. As I mentioned there in the introduction, you're a friend, former colleague of Ahmed. Just give us your reaction to this incident.
I mean, it's outrageous. I first met Ahmed actually in 2009. That's how long Ahmed has been a journalist. And since then, he has gone on from working at Al Jazeera English, where we met, to working for PBS, Huffington Post, for writing lots of different outlets. He is a well-known, well-loved, investigative journalist. He's won various awards, including in the UK, so the British Journalist Award. Amnesty International UK gave him an award for a piece he did on Egypt. He's very well respected, and this kind of news is just shocking, and that's the point of it, right? To shock us all so much that we're afraid to report the truth and to tell the truth. What we know so far is that he was taken by Kuwaiti authorities when he was visiting family in Kuwait on March 2nd. He has been detained now for 6 weeks or so without charge, although, as you said there in the intro, CPJ does believe that national security charges are coming. Those sort of wide-sweeping accusations, such as using your phone illegally, spreading false information. It is that laundry list that we are all used to when governments try and silence innocent people. So make no mistake, this is not about reposting a video that was already out there in the public and trying to hold someone accountable and keep Kuwaitis safe. This is not about keeping Kuwaitis safe. This is about silencing people. And it's about trying to control the narrative of this ongoing conflict in the Middle East by Gulf countries and, in this instance, Kuwait. Ahmed has borne the brunt of that, but unfortunately, he's not the first or the last to do so.
Yeah, Shireen, as you said, he hasn't been seen online since early March. You say he was detained on March the 2nd when he arrived in Kuwait. Again, a well-respected, well-regarded journalist, very active also online and updating all sorts of news coverage to do with the Middle East and geopolitics across the globe. What do we understand now about where the case is at? Is he waiting to face some kind of trial based up on these sort of trumped-up charges that he's currently believed to face?
That is the question that his family are asking, that his colleagues are asking, that really the whole world is asking of Kuwait, but they are not giving away very much information. Sometimes we hear something about a trial date, but then that date comes and goes. As I said, 6 weeks now in detention without charges being formally leveled at him, and we are all confused as to what the next step is. And that is why it's so important right now to talk about it, to spread the word about what is happening to Ahmed, and also to put in context, Yalda, as you said at the start, that this is not an isolated case. What we at Amnesty International and others are seeing is a huge crackdown on freedom of expression across the Gulf since the war began. We're talking about hundreds of people that have been arrested. Qatar and the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, have already said that hundreds have been arrested, and new laws are coming into place every day to try and widen that net. We know that Saudi Arabia has arrested at least 2 people, Bahrain and Kuwait, dozens of people. So this is an increasing phenomena. And as I said, Ahmed may be one of the more high-profile people, and really should send warning signals and a chill up our spine that someone so well-respected and well-renowned can be taken in this way. But he's certainly not the only one, and that is why we are calling for the release of all of those that have been detained for simply expressing their right to freedom of expression. If we don't do this, if we don't sound the alarm bells, then we are not safe. I am not safe. You are not safe. Your teams across the Middle East are not safe.
Shireen, as you point out, there are hundreds of people across the Gulf who have been arrested, detained simply for filming or sharing, even on private WhatsApp messages, the incidents that have taken place over the course of the last 6 weeks. In terms of Ahmed's case, he is, of course, an American citizen as well. What sort of pressure do we know is coming from the State Department on Kuwait for answers or to try and get him released?
All I can say is that all of those who are doing advocacy on behalf of Ahmed have raised this. We have all tried to reach out as well to the US government and to others. It's not just the US government. There are many allies of Gulf states, including the UK, that have leverage there and can absolutely pressure the Kuwaiti government to release Ahmed and to pressure their Gulf allies in general to stop using these counterterrorism wartime laws to silence people at this very difficult point, we understand, in the war and situation for them generally. But it is no excuse for what they're doing. We have not seen, let's say, the kind of pressure that we would hope to have seen coming from the United States, given though that Ahmed, as you said, is also a US citizen, and from other countries, including the UK, who have always talked about the importance of human rights and international human rights standards, all of which are being broken right now by these Gulf countries in these sweeping laws that are being used to crack down on hundreds of people.
Shireen, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. You're watching The World live from Beirut. Still to come on the programme. 3 years after Sudan erupted into war, the Foreign Secretary tells us it's this century's greatest humanitarian crisis.
Big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent.
You are not getting in this elevator, okay?
The judge made it very clear that she could see no justifiable reason why Sakulas wasn't here facing British justice.
I promised I would get him justice.
Free, wherever you get your news. This is what they're up against, that the wind is the really big problem. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? This is the exact spot in Nottingham where their 19-year-old son, Barnaby Webber, lost his life.
I just think it's so cruel and so harsh.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
Sky News gets the full story first. Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. It's legal to let go. Set the speed and take the hands off. It's almost driverless, but not quite. Hans is a highly trained police dog. The force is incredible. It's really frightening, actually. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
Liberation Day.
By popular demand, here we are.
Donald Trump. It is quite the story. Wherever it goes, on Trump 100, we go with it.
Can you tell us who you're looking for?
Unbelievable we've come to this.
Are you overstating the reach and significance of this deal?
Not like you said it.
From the UK?
Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
It was 10 feet from him, and all of a sudden the shots rang out.
People impacted.
I'll tell you on another day on the podcast what that was all about.
Join us wherever you get your podcast.
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching. Good to see you again. How are you? Did she say how he was
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back.
Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be allowed to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on. I'm Yalda Hakim.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... My darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
...is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
It is, in the words of the Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper, the greatest humanitarian crisis of the 21st century, born out of a war in Sudan that today passed the 3-year mark, a conflict defined by famine, massacres and sexual violence. Estimates vary widely on the number of people killed, but the most commonly quoted figure of 150,000 is widely seen as well below the true toll, which may never be known. At least 14 million people are displaced. Many have fled over borders to Chad, Egypt, South Sudan and beyond. Here's some of what we've seen since the war broke out in April 2023.
As the military moves forward and reclaims more territory, it's an entire generation that will have to contend with the horrifying impacts of this conflict.
Well, as you saw there, our Africa correspondent Yusra El-Beghir has followed the Sudan war right from the beginning, a deeply personal story for her in the country she was born. Yusra spoke to the Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper.
I'm standing in the courtyard of the Foreign Office after sitting down with Yvette Cooper, the UK's Foreign Secretary. We spoke about Sudan, the largest war on civilians in the world that receives little to no attention globally.
Well, we want to bring the focus of the world onto what is happening in Sudan. It is the greatest humanitarian crisis of the 21st century, and we desperately need a ceasefire. We desperately need support for those who are facing the most unimaginable atrocities and the most unimaginable experiences as a result of the conflict still 3 years on.
You've described the war in Sudan as the worst humanitarian crisis in the 21st century. The UN has described Gaza as the worst humanitarian crisis. Is there a reason that you've said that?
So I think if you look at the number of people who have been killed, the scale of the sexual violence being used and the number of people facing famine, you currently have, I think, millions of people in Sudan who continue to be at risk of famine, equivalent really to the scale of the population in London. And so that scale of the famine, that scale of the number of people being killed, I think does need more focus. But look, I'm also deeply concerned about what is continuing to happen in Gaza. And we have called that the ceasefire steps that took place in the autumn was really important, but we need to see much more progress. And there's a risk at the moment that we've seen humanitarian aid actually being reduced to Gaza in the recent weeks. I'm really concerned about that. We have to get support back in for Gaza. We have to have the ceasefire process maintained.
There's been an emergency break on student visas for students from Sudan, among 3 other countries. Were you consulted on that at all, given your assessment of the scale of the tragedy there? Did you hear from the Home Office about it prior to?
Well, we want to see students to be able to come to the UK from all over the world, including from Sudan, including from other countries as well. And that's why the Home Office has set out the work that it's doing to look at, for example, a refugee visa for students as well to be able to come to the UK.
3 years of war has seen Sudan torn apart, with large swathes of territory now held by the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, who are battling the military for control of the country. The areas in yellow are controlled by the RSF, and the areas in green have been reclaimed or maintained by the Sudanese armed forces, including the capital, Khartoum. More than 12 million people have been displaced by this war, with many of them fleeing combat zones more than once.
Look, there's an immediate humanitarian issue, and that's why the UK will be announcing this week over £140 million this year for humanitarian support. And that includes, we're going to be increasing the funding for the local Sudanese community-led responses. They call it emergency response rooms. And we're going to be doubling the funding for those groups because they provide the most important ground-level support, including for survivors of sexual conflict as well.
The UK is accused of covering up for the UAE, kind of shielding them from criticism and accountability in terms of backing the RSF in this war. What do you make of that?
We've been very clear, first of all, that there should be no arms flows. We have supported the no arms flows to anywhere in Sudan. Secondly, the UN arms embargo for Darfur, and also being clear that all countries need to take responsibility for this. We have raised these issues not just with UAE, but with Saudi and Egypt and the US, which is the 4 members of the Quad, because those countries are pulling together, have made statements which are all about ensuring that there is supposedly action against the external support that is coming to Sudan and to the warring parties. But what we need to see is that work taken forward in practice, including around the ceasefire.
Yvette Cooper speaking to our Yusra El-Bagir there, and Yusra joins me live now. Yusra, in our introduction, we talked about the fact that you've been covering this war for the past 3 years, but of course this is also a deeply personal war for you. I can never forget the images of you going back to your family home and finding it completely destroyed. Just one story of hundreds of thousands of people who have had their homes destroyed, their lives turned upside down. And those are just the lucky ones. So many more have been killed and completely displaced, being forced to flee their homes.
I mean, Yalda, you know the story of my home, but what we've tried to do is show that this is just one house out of millions of homes, millions of families, 13 million people from the start of the war. Some have returned, some have been unable to return. And the point of sharing some of those personal stories is just to give you a glimpse into the many stories that we haven't been able to hear. That's been one of the most tough things to deal with, is the fact that we're only just scratching the surface. It's such a huge expanse of territory that's affected by the war. And now we're seeing drone strikes impact more and more people from the start of the year. Just the first 2 months, we documented 478 civilian deaths from drone strikes from both the army and the Rapid Support Forces. And Tom Fletcher, the UN aid chief, came out to say that there have now been 700 deaths from drone strikes in the first 3 months of this year alone. So there's a lot of concern about the fact that it's been 3 years, non-stop, without a single ceasefire, without a single lull in fighting. In some of the conflicts that we're seeing at the moment, we've still been able to see people have a sense of reprieve, of relief, just some periods where the fighting stops. That is not the case in Sudan. It is consistently relentless. And so people are gathering in Berlin for a Berlin conference that's been organized by the UK, the EU, the US, to try and navigate some humanitarian solutions. But the warring parties are not invited. And that does bring a lot in question. It brings a lot in question in terms of, will the warring parties come to the table? Will they seek a political solution? We've even spoken to soldiers who've told us that a military solution is not a solution because they've seen their own troops fight to the death and still not succeed. There still not be some sort of consensus. So this is, another year. We're entering the fourth year. And I think many of us who are reporting on this are preparing for another year of tragedy, another year of helplessness, another year of people holding on to what they can and only turning to each other really on the ground to be able to get through yet another stage of relentless armed violence.
Yeah, absolutely. A heartbreaking situation. Yusra, thank you so much for all of your reporting. Well, let's return to the Iran war now and what are potential hopes that the US and Iran are edging closer to another round of talks, potentially sometime next week. Well, joining me now is Vali Nasser, Professor of International Affairs and Middle East Studies at Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies. Vali, really good to see you and speak to you. We've been following your assessment over the last 6 weeks of this war, and you and I have spoken a few times as well. But just at this point, where we're still within this 2-week period and it may extend beyond this, what do you see now as likely to happen next? Do you see these next round of talks taking place? We know that the last round were described as failed or collapsed, but it feels like there's momentum building again.
Well, thank you, Yalda. I don't think the last round collapsed. I think after 21 hours of negotiations, they did hit some key roadblocks, but they nevertheless must have made sufficient progress, from which they can restart. And now, about what they couldn't resolve, Pakistan is apparently very aggressively trying to find solutions to bring both sides back into negotiations. I think the trip today of the Pakistani military chief to Iran is very significant. He would not have gone to Iran unless he was carrying a message directly from the President of the United States, and he will carry back a message or a response from the Iranians back to President Trump. And that probably is around the issues that they couldn't find agreement on, like zero enrichment, what happens to Iran's highly enriched uranium, the fate of the Strait of Hormuz, and certain guarantees that Iran wants around the lifting of sanctions. So I think both sides went back from Islamabad. The United States upped the ante by putting a blockade. But at the same time, I think the door of diplomacy is open, and both sides understand that the only way in which they can finish this war without a massive escalation is through talking.
Yeah, and Vali, I mean, as you say, the issues that were on the table in Islamabad last weekend was money, ships, uranium. These are still big issues, and the fact that the Strait of Hormuz is a big part of the talking points now, an issue that wasn't necessarily part of discussions 6 weeks ago before this war started. Okay, there were 21 hours of discussions, but it is going to take a long time to resolve some of these big problems that both sides are demanding.
Absolutely. I think a very big deal is not going to be done very quickly, but they can come to certain agreement that would allow the end to the fighting. It's not just a ceasefire, but Iran and the United States would agree that there's a cessation of hostilities. The core to this is an agreement over the nuclear issue, because that's the modality through which Iran would get sanctions relief. And the United States would also get finality on the issue that supposedly it took it to war. But the larger issue of Lebanon, the fate of Strait of Hormuz, et cetera, still has to be negotiated and sorted out. And I think one other issue that is there is that for Iran is also an issue of trust. They want to make sure that President Trump actually implements what he promises. And like last time, he doesn't leave the deal after the United States gets what it wants. And so all of these issues are going to be quite tough. But I think the most important thing here is that diplomacy is continuing and it has momentum within it.
Yeah, and Vali, that's the point here, that this isn't just about a ceasefire or cessation of hostilities. This is ensuring that we don't see this kind of scenario again, certainly from the perspective of the Iranians. They don't want every 6 months, every 8 months, the United States and Israel launching attacks on their military sites or their nuclear facilities.
Very true. I think in Iran's perspective, partly they're hoping that the damage that this war did to the global economy, how much it cost the United States, how difficult it was, will give America pause in terms of thinking of going back to war again. President Trump had thought that this would be a quick war. Now he realizes it's very difficult. It's very complicated to finish it. It's been hugely costly. But also one reason Iran wants to hold on to the Strait of Hormuz and threaten it with closure again is that it sees that as right now the strongest deterrence that it has. Stronger than a nuclear program, which has not deterred war on Iran, stronger than Iran's missiles. I think the fear that the closure of the Strait of Hormuz would again put the international economy in a situation of a free fall is the biggest deterrence Iran has. And that's why they will not give it up, and that's why they're so adamant about it.
Vali, really good to talk to you and get your assessment. Thank you so much for joining us here on the program. Well, that was Vali Nasser, and Vali mentioned Lebanon and the potential ceasefire here. Tonight, there are talks that perhaps there will be a ceasefire here in Lebanon. I just want to leave you with these images of the skyline over Beirut. This city, this country has faced an incredibly brutal 6 weeks of war, and certainly in the last week when Israel launched those 100 strikes in 10 minutes, killing 357 people, most of them here in Beirut, has horrified and shocked this nation and this city, still reeling from that attack. So they are hoping that there will be some kind of ceasefire tonight. Goodbye for now.